This video examines published sources for educational purposes. Interpretations are attributed. No claims are asserted as fact without citation. October 14th, 1943. 29,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. The formation of B-17 flying fortresses stretched across the sky like silver dots against the autumn clouds. Inside the lead bomber, Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson gripped his .50 caliber machine gun and scanned the horizon. No fighter escorts. The P-47 Thunderbolts had turned back hours ago, their fuel tanks empty, leaving 291 heavy bombers to face the heart of the Reich alone. What Johnson couldn't see were the German fighters already climbing to intercept them. Major Egon Meyer of Jagdgeschwader II had been waiting for this moment. According to military records from the German Federal Archives, Meyer radioed his pilots with confidence that bordered on contempt. "Here they come again, gentlemen, unescorted American bombers, flying straight and level like training targets." The mathematics of destruction were about to unfold in the skies above Germany, and the numbers would tell a story of tactical failure so complete that it would force the entire American strategic bombing campaign to the brink of collapse. By day's end, 77 B-17s would be shot down, representing 26% of the attacking force. Over 650 American airmen became casualties, including those wounded, taken prisoner, or killed in action. The mission that historians would later call Black Thursday would prove that unescorted bombers, no matter how heavily armed, could not survive against determined fighter opposition. But this devastating defeat would inadvertently set the stage for one of the most remarkable reversals in military aviation history. Within months, a fighter aircraft originally designed by accident would transform the entire air war over Europe, turning German confidence into desperation and American disaster into absolute War II, if you enjoy exploring the victory. Before we uncover today's secret from hidden stories and overlooked battles of history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more untold wartime histories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always amazed that these memories of the past connect us across so many corners of the world. The roots of America's bomber crisis stretched back to pre-war doctrine. According to military historian Richard Overy's analysis in The Bombers and the Bombed, American airpower theorists had convinced themselves that massed formations of heavily armed bombers could fight their way to any target without fighter escort. The Boeing B-17, bristling with up to 13 .50 caliber machine guns, was designed as a flying fortress that could defend itself through coordinated defensive fire. This theory had never been tested against determined, experienced fighter opposition. The Luftwaffe pilots who rose to meet the American formations in 1943 were veterans of 4 years of combat. They had perfected tactics specifically designed to destroy heavy bombers, approaching from angles that minimized exposure to defensive gunfire while maximizing damage to critical aircraft systems. Franz Stiegler, a Luftwaffe pilot with Jagdgeschwader 27, later described the tactical reality in his post-war memoirs. "The American bombers were magnificent aircraft," Stiegler noted, "but they flew in predictable formations at predictable altitudes. We had studied their defensive blind spots extensively. A properly executed head-on attack could destroy a B-17 with a single burst of cannon fire." The German fighter tactics had evolved through bitter experience on the Eastern Front and in the Mediterranean. According to combat reports archived at the National Archives, Luftwaffe pilots had learned to concentrate their attacks on the lead aircraft of bomber formations, knowing that destroying the Pathfinder would disrupt the entire bombing pattern. They attacked in coordinated waves, timing their approaches to overwhelm the bomber's defensive capabilities. Major Egon Meyer had pioneered the head-on attack technique that proved devastatingly effective against B-17s. Rather than approaching from behind, where the bomber's tail gunners had clear fields of fire, Meyer's fighters dove from high altitude directly at the nose of the formation. This gave bomber gunners only seconds to react while exposing the aircraft's most vulnerable areas to German cannon fire. The Schweinfurt missions of 1943 represented the culmination of this tactical development. The target was critical to German war production. The ball-bearing factories that supplied components essential to aircraft and tank manufacturing. American planners believed that destroying Schweinfurt would cripple German industry within weeks. The first Schweinfurt raid on August 17, 1943, had already demonstrated the vulnerability of unescorted bombers. Of the 376 B-17s that participated in the combined Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, 60 were shot down. The losses were staggering, but intelligence reports suggested the bombing had been effective. A second mission was planned for October. Lieutenant Colonel Bairn Lay Jr., who participated in the August mission, described the German fighter attacks in his official report. The enemy fighters came in waves, Lay noted. They attacked with a systematic precision that suggested extensive planning and coordination. Our gunners claimed numerous victories, but the German attacks never seemed to diminish. This discrepancy between claimed and actual German losses would later prove significant. According to Luftwaffe loss records examined by historian John Keegan, German fighter losses during the August Schweinfurt mission totaled only 25 aircraft, far fewer than the 300 claimed by American bomber crews. The fog of war and the stress of combat had led to massive over-reporting of enemy casualties. The October 14th mission began with ominous signs. Weather reconnaissance flights reported heavy cloud cover over the target, making precision bombing difficult. More critically, the P-47 Thunderbolt escorts assigned to accompany the bombers had a maximum combat radius that fell far short of Schweinfurt. The bombers would face over 400 miles of their journey without fighter protection. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 3rd Air Division, understood the risks. According to his post-war memoirs, LeMay had argued for postponing the mission until long-range escort fighters became available. But pressure from Washington to maintain the bombing offensive overruled tactical concerns. At 10:30 hours on October 14th, 291 B-17s lifted off from bases across East Anglia. The formation crossed the English Channel in perfect weather, the autumn sun glinting off polished aluminum wings. The P-47 escorts joined them over Belgium, but their presence would be brief. German radar operators had been tracking the formation since it left English airspace. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77, later described the German response in his memoirs, The Straits of Messina. "We could see from the radar plots that this was a maximum effort," Steinhoff recalled. "Every available fighter in Western Germany was scrambled to intercept." The Luftwaffe had assembled over 300 fighters for the interception, including twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighters, specifically equipped with rockets for bomber destruction. The German fighters positioned themselves along the American route, creating a gauntlet that would extend for hundreds of miles. At 1147 hours, the P-47 escorts reached the limit of their range and turned back toward England. The bomber crews watched their protectors disappear over the horizon, leaving 291 flying fortresses alone in hostile skies. Within minutes, the German attacks began. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of the famous Adolf Galland, led the first wave of interceptors. Flying a Messerschmitt Bf 109G, Galland approached the bomber formation from 12 o'clock high, diving at maximum speed toward the lead aircraft. His combat report, preserved in German military archives, described the attack with clinical precision. "I selected the lead B-17 of the high squadron," Galland wrote. "My opening burst struck the cockpit area, and I observed the aircraft begin to fall away from the formation. Secondary damage suggested serious impact to the aircraft's fuel systems. This single attack had destroyed not just one bomber, but potentially disrupted the navigation of the entire formation." The German attacks came in coordinated waves, each timed to maximize damage while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. Twin-engine Bf-110s fired rockets from beyond machine gun range. their 21-centimeter worth of granite projectiles designed specifically to break up bomber formations. Single-engine fighters followed up with cannon and machine gun attacks on aircraft damaged by the rocket barrage. Staff Sergeant Charles Brown, a ball turret gunner on a B-17 named Ye Old Pub, later described the intensity of the German attacks. "They came from everywhere," Brown recalled in a 1990 interview. "As soon as we'd fight off one group, another would appear. The sky seemed full of German fighters, and they were aggressive beyond anything we'd experienced." The systematic nature of the German assault reflected years of tactical development. According to combat analysis conducted by the US Strategic Bombing Survey, Luftwaffe pilots had identified the most vulnerable points on American bombers through extensive study of captured aircraft and gun camera footage. They concentrated their attacks on engines, fuel tanks, and control surfaces, seeking to achieve maximum damage with minimum ammunition expenditure. The psychological pressure on bomber crews was immense. Unlike the brief, violent encounters typical of fighter versus fighter combat, bomber crews endured hours of sustained attack while maintaining formation discipline and continuing toward their target. The knowledge that fighter escort would not return created a sense of isolation that affected crew performance and morale. Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson, manning the top turret of a B-17 in the 91st Bomb Group, recorded his experiences in a letter home written weeks after the mission. "We could see the German fighters forming up in the distance," Johnson wrote. "They would assemble in large formations, then attack in coordinated groups. Our gunners were brave and skilled, but we were outnumbered 10-1. The German tactics evolved throughout the engagement. Early attacks focused on breaking up the tight bomber formations that provided mutual defensive fire support. Once individual aircraft became separated from the main group, they were systematically destroyed by coordinated fighter attacks. Luftwaffe pilots had learned that isolated bombers were virtually helpless against determined fighter opposition. Major Egon Meyer, flying his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6, personally shot down 2 B-17s during the Schweinfurt mission. His combat report, discovered in German archives after the war, revealed the confidence and tactical sophistication of experienced Luftwaffe pilots. "The American gunners were accurate and determined," Meyer noted, "but their aircraft were predictable targets. We had developed specific attack patterns for each type of bomber, and our pilots executed these maneuvers with precision." The effectiveness of German defensive tactics was reflected in the casualty statistics. Of the 291 B-17s that began the mission, 60 were shot down over Germany. Another 17 were so badly damaged they had to be written off upon return to England. An additional 121 aircraft sustained varying degrees of battle damage. In total, over 65% of the attacking force was either destroyed or damaged by German fighters. The human cost was equally devastating. According to records maintained by the American Battle Monuments Commission, 650 American airmen were lost to casualties, including those killed, wounded, or taken prisoner during the October 14th mission. This represented nearly 23% of the bomber crews who participated in the raid. The disparity between American claims and actual German losses again proved significant. Bomber crews claimed to have shot down over 186 German fighters during the mission. Luftwaffe loss records indicate actual German casualties totaled 25 fighters destroyed and 16 pilots killed. The overclaiming reflected the confusion of aerial combat and the desperate hope that German losses were as severe as American casualties. The bombing results were disappointing despite the enormous sacrifice. Post-war analysis by the US Strategic Bombing Survey determined that the Schweinfurt raids had minimal long-term impact on German ball-bearing production. Alternative suppliers were quickly developed, and critical machinery was dispersed to smaller facilities less vulnerable to bombing attack. The failure of the second Schweinfurt mission marked a crisis point for American strategic bombing doctrine. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, faced a stark choice. Either suspend daylight bombing operations until adequate fighter escort became available, or continue accepting unsustainable casualties in pursuit of questionable results. The mathematics were undeniable. At current loss rates, the 8th Air Force would lose its entire complement of heavy bombers within 6 months. Experienced aircrew casualties were even more critical, as training replacement crews required extensive time and resources that were not immediately available. The psychological impact on bomber crews was equally significant. Intelligence reports noted declining morale and increasing instances of combat fatigue among airmen who had survived multiple unescorted missions. The knowledge that fighter protection ended at the German border created anxiety that affected crew performance and unit cohesion. German confidence, by contrast, had never been higher. Intelligence intercepts revealed Luftwaffe leadership believed American daylight bombing could be defeated entirely through determined fighter opposition. Plans were developed for massive fighter concentrations that would make deep penetration missions impossible to sustain. This confidence would prove tragically premature. Even as German pilots celebrated their victories over Schweinfurt, American factories were already producing the aircraft that would transform the air war over Europe. The solution to the bomber crisis existed, though few recognized its potential at the time. The crisis that followed Black Thursday forced American air commanders to confront an uncomfortable truth. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, received a stark assessment from his intelligence officers in November 1943. According to declassified documents from the Air Force Historical Research Agency, German fighter strength was actually increasing despite months of bombing attacks on aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe had approximately 2,400 single-engine fighters available for defense of the Reich, compared to 1,900 in January 1943. More troubling still, German pilot quality remained exceptionally high. Combat reports analyzed by American intelligence revealed that veteran Luftwaffe pilots were achieving kill ratios of 5-1 against American bombers. These experienced airmen, many with over 100 combat victories, had developed tactics that maximized the inherent advantages of single-engine fighters against multi-engine bombers. The suspension of deep penetration missions represented a fundamental admission of failure. According to historian Donald Miller's analysis in Masters of the Air, the 8th Air Force effectively conceded German air superiority over the Reich heartland. Future bombing operations would be restricted to targets within escort range, primarily in France and the occupied territories. German propaganda seized upon this tactical retreat with considerable effect. Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment proclaimed that American bombing raids had been decisively defeated by German courage and superior tactics. Radio broadcasts monitored by Allied intelligence services claimed that the Luftwaffe had proven the invincibility of German airspace. This propaganda contained uncomfortable elements of truth. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, despite his later reputation for incompetence, accurately assessed the tactical situation in late 1943. According to transcripts of his staff conferences, preserved in German federal archives, Göring told his subordinates that continued heavy bomber losses would force the Americans to abandon daylight operations entirely. The German assessment seemed reasonable based on available evidence. British Bomber Command had already retreated to night operations after suffering unsustainable losses during daylight raids in 1940. The Royal Air Force's experience suggested that unescorted bombers simply could not survive against determined fighter opposition, regardless of their defensive armament. Yet, even as German confidence peaked, American industrial capacity was generating solutions that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance. The answer lay not in heavier bomber armament or tighter formations, but in a fighter aircraft that few had initially recognized as revolutionary. The North American P-51 Mustang had emerged from an almost accidental confluence of British requirements and American engineering innovation. In early 1940, According to aircraft historian Warren Bodie's research in The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a request to manufacture Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license for the Royal Air Force. James Kindleberger, North American's president, made a counter-proposal that seemed impossibly ambitious. Rather than produce an existing design, his company would create an entirely new fighter aircraft in less time than would be required to establish P-40 production lines. The British, desperate for aircraft as German forces overran Western Europe, agreed to this seemingly reckless gamble. The design team led by Edgar Schmood worked with unprecedented speed and innovation. According to company records preserved at the National Air and Space Museum, the prototype NA-73X was completed just 102 days after contract signing. This timeline was virtually unheard of in aircraft development, where new designs typically required 2 to 3 years from conception to first flight. The Mustang's initial design incorporated advanced aerodynamic features that would prove crucial to its later success. The laminar flow wing, based on research conducted by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, reduced drag significantly compared to conventional wing designs. This efficiency translated directly into extended range and higher performance at all altitudes. However, the early Mustang versions suffered from a critical limitation. The Allison V1710 engine, chosen for its availability and reliability, lacked the high-altitude performance necessary for effective bomber escort operations. At altitudes above 15,000 feet, where heavy bombers operated, the Mustang's performance degraded markedly compared to German fighters equipped with supercharged engines. This limitation initially relegated the Mustang to ground attack and tactical reconnaissance roles. Royal Air Force squadrons used early Mustang variants for low-level missions against German targets in occupied Europe. The aircraft performed admirably in these roles, but showed little promise as a high-altitude interceptor or escort fighter. The transformation came through British initiative rather than American planning. In mid-1942, Rolls-Royce engineers proposed replacing the Allison engine with their Merlin 65, equipped with a 2-stage intercooled supercharger. According to test pilot reports archived at the Royal Air Force Museum, this engine change dramatically improved the Mustang's high-altitude performance without sacrificing its exceptional range. The results exceeded all expectations. The Merlin-powered Mustang demonstrated performance superior to any existing fighter aircraft at altitudes above 20,000 feet. More importantly, it retained the range characteristics that would make long-distance escort missions feasible. Test flights conducted at Rolls-Royce's Hucknall facility proved the concept definitively. American production of the improved design began in 1943 as the P-51B and P-51C variants. The Packard Motor Company manufactured Merlin engines under license, ensuring adequate production capacity to meet wartime demands. By November 1943, the first operational P-51Bs were arriving in England for combat evaluation. The 354th Fighter Group became the first unit to receive the new aircraft. Commanded by Colonel Kenneth Martin, the group was officially assigned to the 9th Air Force for tactical operations. However, the urgent need for long-range escort fighters led to their immediate reassignment to 8th Air Force bomber escort duties. The P-51B's combat debut came on December 1, 1943, during a fighter sweep over France. According to the group's official history, maintained by the Air Force Historical Research Agency, pilots were impressed by the aircraft's high-altitude performance and exceptional fuel efficiency. External drop tanks extended the Mustang's combat radius to over 650 miles, sufficient to escort bombers to targets throughout Germany. Major James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group achieved the type's first significant combat success on January 11, 1944. Flying alone after becoming separated from his flight, Howard encountered a formation of 30 German fighters attacking a bomber group over Oschersleben. His single P-51B engaged the entire enemy formation for over 30 minutes, shooting down at least 4 aircraft and disrupting the attack completely. This engagement, later analyzed by combat intelligence officers, demonstrated the P-51's tactical advantages over existing German fighters. The Mustang's high-altitude performance matched or exceeded that of the Messerschmitt Bf 109G and Focke-Wulf FW-190A. More critically, its superior range allowed American pilots to engage German fighters on more favorable terms, pursuing them to their bases and attacking during vulnerable landing approaches. German pilots quickly recognized the threat posed by the new American fighter. According to post-war interviews conducted by Allied intelligence officers, Luftwaffe pilots initially mistook P-51s for captured American aircraft being flown by German pilots. The Mustang's performance characteristics seemed impossible for an American-designed fighter. Major Georg Peter Eder of Jagdgeschwader II described his first encounter with P-51s in a 1960 interview preserved in German military archives. "We expected to engage the usual American fighters," Eder recalled. P-47s and P-38s were predictable opponents with known limitations. The new aircraft was completely different. It could match our climb rate and exceed our dive performance while maintaining superior range. The psychological impact on German pilots proved as significant as the tactical advantages. For 3 years, Luftwaffe fighters had enjoyed performance superiority over their opponents. The arrival of an American fighter that could match German aircraft in all flight regimes challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat over Europe. The expansion of P-51 operations proceeded rapidly through early 1944. Additional fighter groups received the new aircraft as production increased at North America's Inglewood and Dallas facilities. According to manufacturing records examined by historian Jeffrey Ethel, monthly P-51 production reached 500 aircraft by March 1944, enabling the rapid re-equipment of existing fighter units. The first major test of long-range escort capabilities came during the renewed bombing offensive against German aircraft production facilities. Operation Argument, later known as Big Week, targeted aircraft factories throughout Germany during February 20-25, 1944. For the first time, American heavy bombers would attack targets in central Germany with continuous fighter escort from takeoff to landing. The tactical impact was immediate and decisive. German fighters, previously able to concentrate their attacks on undefended bomber formations, now faced coordinated opposition from experienced escort pilots. Luftwaffe tactics that had proven devastatingly effective against unescorted bombers became suicidal when applied against formations protected by P-51s. Major General Jimmy Doolittle, who had assumed command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, implemented tactical changes that multiplied the P-51's effectiveness. Previous escort doctrine required fighters to maintain close formation with bombers, responding only to immediate threats. Doolittle authorized aggressive pursuit of German interceptors, allowing American fighters to hunt enemy aircraft throughout their operational areas. This tactical shift proved revolutionary. According to combat reports analyzed by the Office of Statistical Control, P-51 pilots achieved dramatically higher victory rates when freed from close escort restrictions. German fighters, previously able to attack bombers with relative impunity after initial interceptions, found themselves pursued by American fighters with superior range and performance. The Battle of Berlin marked the culmination of this tactical evolution. On March 6, 1944, over 800 American heavy bombers attacked targets in the German capital, escorted by more than 900 fighters, including substantial numbers of P-51Bs. This represented the first time American fighters had operated over Berlin in daylight, a psychological blow to German morale that exceeded the physical damage inflicted by the bombing. Hermann Göring's reaction to this development became legendary among Allied intelligence officers. According to transcripts of Luftwaffe staff conferences discovered after the war, Göring told his subordinates that the appearance of American fighters over Berlin proved the war was lost. His exact words, preserved in German military archives, were reported as, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up. The Reich Marshal's assessment, while characteristically dramatic, reflected genuine strategic insight. The ability of American fighters to operate over German territory for extended periods represented the complete collapse of the defensive strategy that had protected German industry for 4 years. No target within the Reich remained beyond the reach of escorted American bombers. German-American bombing attacks faced a tactical situation, coordinated mass attacks. The presence of large numbers, which they were unprepared. The Luftwaffe's defensive system fighter units, previously confident in their ability to defeat, had been optimized to engage unescorted bombers through corps of high-performance escort fighters, invalidated these tactics entirely. The systematic destruction of experienced German pilots accelerated rapidly through spring 1944. According to Luftwaffe personnel records examined by historian John Wheel, pilot losses during March and April 1944 exceeded replacement training capacity by over 300%. The cumulative effect of sustained combat against numerically superior opponents with equivalent aircraft performance proved unsustainable. This attrition extended beyond simple numerical losses. The Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots, many with over 100 combat victories, were being killed or wounded at rates that eliminated institutional knowledge faster than it could be transmitted to replacement pilots. The quality degradation of German fighter units became apparent to Allied intelligence through intercepted radio communications and prisoner interrogations. The transformation of air combat over Europe was complete by summer 1944. American bombers that had once faced certain destruction when venturing beyond fighter range now operated throughout German airspace with acceptable loss rates. The strategic bombing campaign, suspended after the disasters of 1943, resumed with devastating effectiveness. The of 1944 with relentless efficiency. Systematic destruction of German airpower proceeded through the summer. According to records maintained by the Luftwaffe High Command, German fighter pilot losses during May and June exceeded 50% of available strength. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77, described the tactical situation in his post-war memoir, The Last Chance. "We were no longer hunting," Steinhoff noted. "We had become the hunted." The transformation was visible in German radio intercepts monitored by Allied intelligence services. Previously confident Luftwaffe pilots now reported American fighters everywhere over German territory. Flight Lieutenant Hans-Joachim Marseille's replacement, Oberfeldwebel Gustav Rödel, transmitted a desperate message on June 15th that was recorded by British listening posts. "Request immediate assistance. P-51s attacking our field during landing approach. Impossible to maintain operations." This tactical reversal represented more than numerical superiority. According to combat analysis conducted by the US Strategic Bombing Survey, American fighter pilots were achieving kill ratios of 3-1 against German interceptors by mid-1944. The Mustang's performance advantages, combined with improved pilot training and superior tactical doctrine, had fundamentally altered the balance of air combat over Europe. General Adolf Galland, commanding the German fighter forces, faced an impossible strategic situation. Intelligence reports discovered in German federal archives reveal that Galland requested permission to withdraw his remaining experienced pilots from defensive operations to preserve them for a final concentrated offensive. Hitler's response, according to stenographic records of the Führer's military conferences, was characteristically inflexible. "Every German fighter will defend the fatherland to the last bullet." The human cost of this strategic stubbornness became apparent through Luftwaffe personnel records examined by historian Donald Caldwell. Of the approximately 2,400 German fighter pilots available in January 1944, fewer than 600 remained operationally effective by August. The institutional knowledge accumulated through 4 years of combat was being systematically destroyed faster than replacement training could compensate. Major Erich Hartmann, the Luftwaffe's highest scoring ace with 352 confirmed victories, described the deteriorating situation in a 1990 interview preserved in German military archives. By summer 1944, we were sending boys against men, Hartmann recalled. New pilots arrived with perhaps 60 hours of flight training. American pilots had over 400 hours before entering combat. The outcome was predictable. This training disparity reflected broader resource constraints affecting German operations. According to fuel consumption records analyzed by historian Adam Tooze, the Luftwaffe's training program had been reduced to critical minimums due to petroleum shortages. Student pilots received basic flight instruction, but virtually no gunnery training or advanced tactical education. They entered combat woefully unprepared for the sophisticated air battles developing over Germany. The P-51's impact extended beyond direct air-to-air combat. American fighters, freed from close escort restrictions, began systematic attacks on German airfields throughout occupied territory. These strafing missions, conducted by fighters returning from escort duties with remaining ammunition and fuel, proved devastatingly effective against aircraft caught on the ground during vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, pioneered aggressive airfield attack tactics that multiplied American fighter effectiveness. According to his unit's combat reports preserved at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, Zemke's pilots destroyed more German aircraft on the ground than in air-to-air combat during June and July 1944. These attacks forced the Luftwaffe to disperse operations to smaller, more vulnerable fields, while reducing overall sortie rates. The psychological pressure on German pilots intensified as American operations expanded. Major Georg Peter Eder of Jagdgeschwader II described the mental strain in his post-war testimony to Allied interrogators. "We knew that American fighters would be waiting for us," Eder stated. "During takeoff, during combat, during landing. There was no safe time, no safe place. This constant tension affected pilot performance significantly. German defensive tactics evolved in response to American fighter superiority. But these adaptations revealed desperation rather than strength." According to Luftwaffe operational directives discovered after the war, German fighters were ordered to avoid combat with P-51s whenever possible, concentrating exclusively on bomber attacks. This tactical retreat acknowledged American fighter superiority while attempting to preserve German bomber destruction capabilities. The Sturmgruppen, specialized German units equipped with heavily armed and armored fighters, represented one final attempt to neutralize American bombing effectiveness. These units, flying modified Focke-Wulf FW-190s with additional cannon and armor protection, were designed to destroy bombers through mass-coordinated attacks regardless of escort fighter opposition. Oberst Hans-Günther von Kornatzky, commanding Sturmgruppe 1, led several massive attacks against American bomber formations during summer 1944. According to German combat reports analyzed by historian John Wheel, these formations achieved temporary tactical successes, destroying significant numbers of B-17s and B-24s during concentrated assaults. However, the Sturmgruppen suffered catastrophic losses to escorting P-51s, making such operations unsustainable. The July 7, 1944 engagement over central Germany demonstrated both the potential and limitations of German defensive tactics. Sturmgruppe 1, supported by conventional fighters, intercepted elements of the 2nd Bomb Division operating without immediate escort coverage. In a coordinated attack, lasting less than 10 minutes, German fighters destroyed 12 B-24 Liberators of the 492nd Bomb Group. However, the German tactical success proved pyrrhic. P-51s from the 4th Fighter Group, returning from another engagement, caught the German formation during its withdrawal. According to American combat reports, the Mustangs destroyed 11 Sturmgruppe aircraft while suffering no losses themselves. The mathematical exchange rate favored the Americans decisively, as trained bomber crews could be replaced more easily than experienced German fighter pilots. By August 1944, the strategic air situation over Europe had stabilized in favor of American operations. According to loss statistics compiled by the Office of Statistical Control, heavy bomber casualties had declined to approximately 2% per mission, compared to over 15% during unescorted operations in 1943. This dramatic reduction in losses enabled sustained bombing campaigns that previous casualty rates had made impossible. The effectiveness of P-51 escort operations was reflected in German industrial production statistics examined by the US Strategic Bombing Survey. Aircraft manufacturing, which had continued increasing through 1943 despite Allied bombing efforts, began declining significantly in mid-1944. The combination of accurate bombing and reduced German fighter interference was achieving the strategic objectives that had eluded earlier unescorted operations. Major General Curtis LeMay, commanding the 3rd Air Division, noted the transformation in his post-war memoirs. By September 1944, we were operating over Germany with the confidence of a peacetime training mission, LeMay observed. German fighter opposition had become sporadic and ineffective. The air superiority we had sought since 1942 was finally achieved. This air superiority enabled the expansion of American bombing operations beyond strategic targets to tactical support of ground forces. The approaching D-Day landings in Normandy required comprehensive air preparation, including attacks on transportation networks, coastal defenses, and troop concentrations. P-51s provided the escort capability necessary for precision bombing of these tactical targets while maintaining strategic pressure on German industry. The Normandy invasion preparations revealed another dimension of P-51 effectiveness. According to operational planning documents preserved at the National Archives, Allied commanders designed air operations assuming complete air superiority over the invasion beaches. This assumption, which would have been impossible in 1943, reflected confidence in American fighter capabilities that the Mustang had largely created. German recognition of American air superiority was evident in defensive preparations for the expected invasion. Intelligence reports intercepted by Allied codebreakers revealed that German commanders assumed Allied airpower would dominate the battle environment. Defensive planning focused on surviving air attacks rather than achieving tactical air parity, a fundamental shift from earlier German confidence. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. According to post-war interrogations of German leadership conducted by the Office of Strategic Services, many senior commanders recognized by early 1944 that the war was effectively lost due to American air superiority. The ability to conduct sustained bombing operations throughout German territory represented a strategic advantage that German defensive capabilities could not counter. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's assessment, discovered in his personal papers after the war, was particularly prescient. The enemy's air superiority is complete and decisive, Rommel noted in April 1944. Our ground operations must assume constant air attack while enemy movements proceed without interference. This fundamental imbalance cannot be sustained indefinitely. The psychological impact on German civilian morale became increasingly significant as American bombing operations intensified. According to reports compiled by the SS Security Service, civilian confidence in German defensive capabilities declined markedly after repeated daylight raids on previously secure targets. The visible presence of American fighters over German cities demonstrated the failure of Luftwaffe promises to protect the homeland. Dr. Joseph Goebbels' diary entries, discovered after the war, revealed growing concern about civilian morale in bombed areas. The appearance of enemy fighters over our cities has a devastating psychological effect, Goebbels noted in May 1944. People see that our defenses cannot protect them and begin to question ultimate victory. The transformation that began over Schweinfurt in October 1943 reached its inevitable conclusion by summer 1944. What had started as German mockery of unescorted American bombers evolved into grudging respect. then desperate fear of the silver Mustangs that now ruled European skies. The P-51 had accomplished what seemed impossible just months earlier, turning American disaster into complete air superiority over the heart of the Reich. The mathematics of this reversal tell the complete story. In October 1943, German fighters destroyed 26% of an unescorted American bomber formation. By August 1944, bomber losses had declined to 2% per mission with P-51 Escort. The aircraft that emerged almost by accident from British desperation and American innovation had rewritten the fundamental equations of air warfare. Hermann Göring's admission that seeing Mustangs over Berlin meant the war was lost proved prophetic beyond his immediate understanding. The P-51 represented more than tactical superiority. It embodied American industrial capacity to transform defeat into victory through engineering excellence and mass production. The same factories that had struggled to produce adequate fighters in 1942 were delivering 500 Mustangs monthly by 1944. The human dimension of this transformation perhaps resonates most powerfully across the decades. Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson, who had gripped his machine gun in tension over Schweinfurt, later wrote that P-51 escorts gave bomber crews something they had lost: hope. German pilots like Franz Steigler, who had once attacked American formations with contempt, found themselves hunted across their own homeland by aircraft superior to anything the Luftwaffe could field. The lessons extend beyond military history into fundamental questions about technological innovation and strategic adaptation. The P-51's success resulted not from revolutionary breakthroughs, but from the marriage of existing technologies, American airframes with British engines, applied with unprecedented urgency and scale. Sometimes the most profound changes emerge from practical solutions to immediate problems rather than grand strategic visions. This story reminds us that individual courage, whether American or German, could not overcome systemic advantages in resources, training, and technology. The bravery of bomber crews flying unescorted missions was undeniable, as was the skill of Luftwaffe pilots defending their homeland. But courage alone could not bridge the gap between American industrial capacity and German resource constraints. The P-51 Mustang stands as testimony to a fundamental truth about modern warfare: that victory belongs not necessarily to the bravest, but to those who can most effectively combine human skill with technological superiority and industrial abundance. The silver fighters that transformed the skies over Europe carried within their aluminum frames the concentrated power of a democratic societies mobilized for a global conflict.